Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Thursday Adult Craft. Today, we are doing a craft in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month, which runs from September 15th to October 15th. And we're excited to dive into that. Just so everyone knows, before we get started, I have all of my supplies laid out here that have been provided in the craft bag. The additional things that you'll need are a full cup of water, cup has been provided, and then a nice little stack of paper towels. These are great if your work area gets messy or if you need to protect your computer if you have wet or dirty hands. So again, I know I mentioned that we are doing this craft for Hispanic Heritage Month. We want to give a shout out of thanks to the Friends of the Library who have provided the craft supplies that we'll be using today and who, always give us ongoing support of library programs, including this one. Yes, so Carol, forgive me, Carol, the adult librarian, is also joining me for this craft today, and she has been gracious enough to walk us through or show us some lovely examples of some really simple trees of life, that you can choose to base your model on. Today, we are going to be showing you just how to create the base. It's always something that you can embellish upon yourself, but we wanted to kind of lay the foundational framework. So as Carol walks through these slides, I'm going to give you a history of the tree of life so that you get a sense of the historical meaning and how it ties into Hispanic culture. So for the ancient Maya, they called this the world tree, and it was thought to provide a channel for the souls of humans to travel into the underworld or the heavens, and was seen as sacred because it was the only way the gods had of traveling into the middle world, which they considered to be Earth. We also in this craft want to acknowledge that it does have a colonial history as well. Tree of Life sculptures were used by Spanish missionaries to teach the biblical story of creation to indigenous peoples of Central and South America. Over time, these clay replicas have become more colorful, intricately decorated pieces with flowers, leaves, and animals on their branches. The themes have evolved over time, and today it is common to find trees of life conveying subject matter such as Day of the Dead and Mexican folk art of many different styles. So as the lovely Carol has shown us, we just have some examples here of really simple forms that you can start with. The one that we're going to be focusing on today that I'm going to be showing you how to make is similar to this beautiful piece that was previously created by Carol, that you have the base, the candelabra in the middle, and then some simple arms. If you were feeling a little bit more brave, I have it on good authority that Carol is going to make a more intricate arm frame. So if you're interested in going a little bit above and beyond, feel free, as she's holding up there. So she's going to do the double arm structure. I'm so excited.
I'm going to try.
I'm so excited to see how it turns out. So that's the idea of what we're starting with today. So I'm going to, Carol, is there anything you'd like to add before we kind of go over our supplies and dive in here?
I'm just super excited to attempt this, and I love playing with clay. It really feels so good just to get your hands dirty. So I'm prepared with a paper towel over my mouse if I need to do anything on my computer, and a pencil I don't mind getting dirty with my hand if I have to hit any of the buttons.
Very smart. It's all those helpful tips and tricks beforehand that are good to know, because you never know what you're going to run into until you're, trying to touch your nice clean keyboard with dirty clay hands. So thank you for clarifying that. Perfect. All right, so if you're ready, Carol, and if everyone that's watching is ready, so I'm going to briefly go over the supply kits that were provided, what's involved, so that people that have the kits and are using them at home, and then also people who have craft supplies readily available, know what they need to start. So we already mentioned the cup of water and the paper towels. We have our block of modeling clay here. We have our plastic utensils, a spoon, a fork, and a knife. And then we have 5 different colors of paint, water-based paint, that were provided in the bags, along with our paintbrush. So I think that's everything we need to get started. So I'm gonna kind of clear out a little workspace here, and I think we'll jump right into it. Okay, so I'm gonna take my modeling clay out of the bag. The ones that we've provided are about 5 inches by 1 inch by 1 inch. So, you know, it can kind of fit in both my hands. So, you know, if you're using the library provided clay at home, or if you're working with your own, that's kind of the size that we're going for. Now, to start, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my knife. I'm gonna cut about 1/4 of my clay off. It can be a little less, a little more, depending. And what I'm gonna do is set this aside and save this to create the embellishments. You'll notice on the model that Carol has already created for us, by embellishments, I mean the leaves, the flowers, the birds that she's created to affix to the overall base. So if you want a lot of embellishment and detail, then you can use more, you know, 1/3 of your clay block. If you want less and you want to put the majority of your clay into the stand to make it larger and able to carry more weight for larger candles, then you can do that as well. Okay, so we've got our 4th set aside. With the remaining clay, what we're gonna do is take like 1/3 of that to create the base. And I know that many of you are joining us or watching to do crafts. I bet you didn't know that we'd also be practicing our fractions as much as we are, but that's always a part of it. So, okay, so now I've got 1/3 of my remaining block, and I'm going to focus on this right now. So with that 1/3, what I'm gonna do is use my flat surface and my hand to just roll it into a ball here. And I noticed Carol also had a really great technique of kind of using both of her hands to roll it and get it as round as you can. And we're just shaping until it looks fairly like a circle, like a rock, like a boulder.
I think I like the table better.
I was gonna say, it's nice. It creates, there's less give. Yes. All right. So when we have that nice boulder, what we're going to do is turn it into the base of our tree of life. So you'll see here, it's this round supportive part at the bottom. So in order to do that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my little pincer fingers here, my forefinger and my thumb, and I'm just kind of going to taper and pinch the top so that I'm pulling my ball up into almost what looks like a pyramid or a 3-dimensional triangle. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but as long as there's a broader base on the bottom and then the top kind of tapers up. Okay.
And Brittny, I'm just going to quickly comment in case your clay bag wasn't sealed all the way and your clay seems a little dry, all you need to do is add water to, especially if you get any creases or cracks that you don't like. It does make it a little bit messier, but it works. It softens the clay right up.
Thank you so much, Carol. That's such an important point. Yes, definitely makes for more malleable sculpting. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty good with mine here. How about you, Carol?
Yeah, I think it's
fabulous. I love it. That looks great. And I noticed on Carol's, this is a really important point, is that you'll notice that it comes up into a triangular shape, but there is a really flat base on the top because you're going to be building you know, the main branch of, or the trunk of the tree of life, if you will, onto that. You do want there to be a bit of a flat surface so that you can set something on there and it will support that. Okay. All right, so with our base done, now what we're going to work on next is the trunk of the tree of life, which is this, you know, primary beam coming up from the middle here. You'll notice in the one that Carol already created, there's this divot in the top, which is a space to put a candle. A lot of the trees of life, pardon me, you know, are used as candelabras or candle holders. So we'll show you that later, but just keeping that in mind, as that's a really nice detail of it. Okay, so now I'm going to take the block of clay that I have left, and I'm going to take about another third or so. Again, depending on what kind of shape you want to make, you can determine how much clay you want to use. If you want a tree of life that is going to be supporting more candles, heavier items, you would probably want a stronger, broader base. But if you want it to look more decorative and delicate, then you could do less clay. So the way that I'm going to do this is, so for this shape, we essentially want to turn this into a snake. So I have my big lump of clay here. What you can do is, once again, using either the flat tabletop or both of your hands, you're just going to be rubbing the clay between two flat surfaces, almost like rolling out pizza dough, to turn it from a block or a ball of clay into into a supportive, looking good, Carol.
Thank you, Brittany. I was going to comment about how, because my clay is so nice and malleable, it's not sturdy enough to stand on its own. And so before I would attach it, right, what I want to do is actually build my design with this flat, like this.
Very smart.
So I'm going to build that, and then I'll attach this part afterwards, because it's really not going to be able to stand, especially if I add branches to my tree.
Very smart, Carol. Thank you for that. So let's go with that order of operations. So now that we have the trunk of our tree, let's work on our branches and then affix those on a flat surface. Okay, so now this is where you can decide, based on the slides that you saw at the beginning, you get to choose whatever shape you want, whether you want it to be more simple or more intricate. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to be working on the base that looks like this one that Carol previously did. So I'm just going to have two arms on the side of mine that start at the base and attach at the top. And Carol is going to do one with double the branches. So 4 arms or 4 branches, 2 on each side of it.
And this was my design, and I'm already thinking about changing it. So
really?
we'll find out what it looks like when I'm done.
Okay, that sounds perfect. I say let's try it and see where it gets us. That is, I've noticed that is the fun thing about clay. As many ideas as you come into it with, sometimes the material just has different ideas, and so you kind of have to adjust on the fly, and that's just as valuable as coming in with a blueprint that you can completely abide by.
Well, my concern is it seems like this is going to be weighty at the top, and that it might not be as stable. So I almost want to put more weight at the bottom.
Very
I don't
smart.
know.
That is very, very smart. Yes. I can see how that would be a concern. Okay. All right, so I'm assuming Carol is doing the same, but I'm just using the same technique as I did with the trunk for the branches. The only difference is that I'm rolling it a little bit more so that the thickness is, isn't quite as much as the trunk. Because again, just like Carol was mentioning, your trunk is the one supporting all of the weight, and your side branches, you know, you don't want them to topple over because they're too top heavy or because they're the same size as the trunk. I'm gonna have to, okay.
So Brittany, I might be ready to attach one of my branches.
Yes.
Do you want me to go ahead and do that?
Please, that would be fabulous. And Carol, we previously discussed a great tip for making sure that at those joints, your clay is holding together. Did you want to walk us through that, or did you want to show us what you have and then we can backtrack a little bit?
So at this point, I can still pick this up. In my design later, I won't be able to pick it up, but I'm just using my finger to smooth the clay so that this is going to be a really nice cohesive joint that isn't going to crack or break later, so that really you won't even be able to see where that joint is. So I think I've done it. And I'm going to do it now at this part.
Okay.
And hopefully it'll work.
I kind of think of it as almost being a welder, but with clay, right? I mean, you're where there used to be separation, you're just smoothing it down so that it's a little bit more cohesive. And I'm finding, Carol, if I may say, that as I do that, especially with mine on the tabletop, sometimes it flattens it a little bit, but I think that's okay, because once you get everything connected, you can basically go in and reshape to just kind of plump it up.
Yeah, and if you need to flip it over to get the other side, that's okay too.
That's a really good idea. I think I'll do that now. And since these trees of life are three-dimensional, and you want to be able to look at them from the front and the back, that would be the next step anyway, because you wouldn't want the front to be seamless and then the back to have seams. So smoothing it out, just like you described, on both sides is definitely the way to go.
So smart.
Okay. All right.
I'm noticing mine isn't exactly symmetrical, but I kind of like that.
Yes, I could not agree more. I could not agree more. It just shows that it's one of a kind and handmade. The fact that you can see the imperfections, I always like that about crafting. I think it makes it a piece more unique, not less. So
Absolutely.
all right. And Carol, if I can say, so I have my basic form here. Again, I'm just kind of putting the basic shapes on, so it doesn't look completely refined yet, but
oh, it looks good.
Yeah, what I'm noticing is, so my base is way too long here. So if you notice in yours, the arms comes right out of the base. And I realized, oh, that doesn't, because then it becomes top heavy. So just a reminder that where you start your arms, if it comes right out of the base, then that takes care of the problem of feeling like you have a
easy
wobbly
solution.
Yes. All right. And then I'm doing the same thing with the trunk into the base as you did with the arms onto the trunk, which is taking my thumb or forefinger and really putting pressure and then pulling down so that they become one integrated piece of clay, as opposed to the trunk sitting on top of the base.
Yeah.
That really takes some finesse. I love the process of figuring out what works and what doesn't, because it definitely, you learn very quickly what's a little bit too,
Yeah, yes.
all right.
I like that. grab a little clay and make a Band-Aid, right?
I was just thinking the same thing. For me, I realized that when I made my base, when I tapered it up, the top of the triangle just was a little bit too small for the trunk that I made. So because I can go back and reshape it, add on some clay to make it a little thicker, those are both great strategies. And like Carol mentioned earlier, if you find that your clay is becoming a little bit dry because you've been working it with your warm hands, then what you can do is just spritz some water on it, and then it should be moist enough for you to be able to reshape and make the adjustments that you need to make sure that it's nice and sturdy. All right, here we go. How is your experiment of the 4 branches coming along, Carol?
Well, I have 2 so far.
Fabulous.
I'm not sure if you can see it on the table.
Yes, I can.
There.
That looks
And I'm going to work on
wonderful.
these and
Very
still have
nice.
not attached the base yet.
But you're doing it the right way. You're taking time on the shaping of it so that everything is solid when you're ready to pull it up and put it all together. Okay.
I'm going to admit to having just taken some clay from the ones that I set aside for the adornments. So,
Perfect.
because I just needed a little bit more.
That is a good way to do it as well. Perfect. This really does become a lesson in physics, testing the boundaries of how top heavy it can be, how wide your base needs to be, the motion. There's just a lot of things at play here. So definitely a work in progress. I did not get it right the first time, but practice makes perfect. So. Okay. Making mine a little thicker and a little closer together, just because I feel like that's a little bit sturdier. All right.
It looks like it's standing okay.
It is, you know what, I think with the adjustments of kind of bringing in the arms a little bit, a little closer to the center, it definitely helped. Okay. All right, Carol, so how would you feel if I started to at least talk through how to think about some of the embellishments, and then as you finish the frame, you can show us? Does that work? Okay.
I think that's great.
Okay, perfect. So now we're going to take whatever clay we have left that we've set aside for the embellishments and whatever extra you may have, and we're going to focus on some of the decorative elements. Again, we've got a beautiful flower, some leaves, a decorative bird here. So let's start with some leaves. I think that's a beautiful starting point. And since the shape is fairly simple, I think it's going to give us good practice with figuring out how to work on something so delicate. Okay, so now the thing to keep in mind, so in practice runs of this, Carol and I have found that because these decorative elements are much smaller and more fragile, the best way that we found to do it was to create them, to paint them separately, and then to adhere them with glue onto the primary structure. If you created the decorative elements and then tried to get them to stick, by smoothing them down like we did with the base and the trunk, they just kind of lose their shape. It's hard to use so little pressure that they're not going to be kind of warped. So that's what we're going to do here. We're just going to make these separately. We'll go through how to paint them briefly, as well as the base, and then you can use Elmer's glue, hot glue, whatever kind of craft glue you have at home, to simply glue them once your tree of life is actually dry and painted itself.
And now that you've said that, I
Yeah.
have a feeling that I'm going to have to glue my base to my tree. I don't know if you can see.
It looks beautiful, Carol. Oh my goodness.
But it is very unstable, and I think it's going to need to dry in that form. So I will probably take the base and make sure that they fit perfectly and let them dry that way, and then glue them, and we'll see if that works.
That is a really good idea. And I love that we're doing it both ways, because I did find that, like you said, when the clay is still wet, it's a little bit hard to control in the way that you want. So I think that's a perfect idea to experiment. Your branches look so gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
I love it. Beautiful. Yeah, I think drying would really help that be a little bit more stable before you try to move it. Okay. All right. So for the leaves, I just have, some of my leftover clay. I've just rolled it into a ball using my 2 palms. And as you see here, what we're going to do is just shape that ball into a long oval leaf shape. So what I'm going to do is, with my ball, I'm going to flatten it on the hard surface of the table. So I have a flat surface to work with. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my thumb and my forefinger, and I'm going to start to pinch the ends. That way, I'm turning it from a circular shape into a leaf shape. And again, I can flatten it as needed. If it starts to stick up when I taper the edges, I can flatten that again as needed. All right, so let me show you what I've got here. So with my leaf, again, it's fairly flat. And when I look at the shape, it's larger in the middle and then has these tapered edges here. Okay. Now, what we have done to create these beautiful textured veins is use our plastic knife. So mine has clay all over it. I'm going to clean it off a little bit. And what we're going to do is use the serrated edge of the plastic knife to create those beautiful little divots. A simple process for creating such a nice detail. Okay, so I'm going to hold this up and do it. Well, I'm going to do it on the table because I don't want it to look like I'm cutting in my hand. Even though it's a plastic knife, you can never be too cautious. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, I'll show you just up in the air. I'm going to create one mark with the serrated edges long ways. And then I'm going to do on each side of the leaf, kind of at a diagonal, use that same serrated edge to create what looks like a leaf vein. Okay, so I'm going to put it down to do that safely, and then I will hold it back up to show you what we have. And when you're using the serrated edge of the knife, I will say you really don't have to use a lot of pressure. Just a tiny bit of pressure and kind of rolling the knife will help you get it in one fell swoop, but it also won't smash it down in the middle. It'll keep the shape of it. This really makes me want to go home and see what other uses I can find for a simple piece of plastic cutlery. It's really amazing when you start to look at things with new eyes, what out of the norm ideas you can have. I give the credit for that to Carol, who came up with that. It's beautiful. All right, so I'm gonna put this a little bit close to the camera, and I'm hoping everyone can see the beautiful detail. So again, I did one press of the knife long ways to create that nice leaf vein. And then I just held my knife at a diagonal, starting in the middle, and then kind of pressing down toward the edge, and it looks like I have a beautiful leaf. It's amazing how simply that comes about.
That looks great, Brittny.
Good, good. Okay, perfect. So, and then Carol, what do you think? Should we, I'm wondering if I should do all embellishments and then paint everything, or if we should show folks how to paint. That way they can kind of take off and create the embellishments they want as they decide what they want to do. What do you think?
I think that might be a good idea, is just to go ahead and paint, because that is the last step.
Perfect.
And you can paint it wet like we're doing, but it's probably good to let it dry overnight.
Perfect. That's right. The other thing we did want to mention is, thank you, Carol, for reminding me of that, is we found with the first version that Carol did is that because it's a water-based paint, the clay, especially if you don't let it dry first, really absorbs the paint. So you'll notice that you can really see the natural color of the clay still coming through. Carol and I decided that we love that element of it because it really gives you a sense of the material that you're working with. But just keep in mind that you probably will have to do a couple of layers of paint, a couple of coats to really get it to stick and be saturated. Okay, so I think, Carol, good point about, for most of these, I think especially for my base, I'm gonna let it dry. But just in case people aren't super familiar with the painting of things, I'll just do one quick coat right now so they're familiar.
I think that's a great idea. And I'm excited because I made a leaf.
Oh, how gorgeous, I love it.
And then I wanted to share one thing that I had done was I started planning out where I wanted to put the leaf, and I put it on the tree to sort of round it so that later when I glue it there, it's not just a flat leaf. It has a little, I don't know if you can see it on the sample.
Yes, let me show.
It's sort of, and if you turn that, you can see where the leaves are curved.
Yep, so if I have the side view here, you can tell that especially here, it's tucked around. Yeah. As well as here, it tucks around rather than just being a flat leaf that has no broad surface to stick. Yeah. Perfect. And the way that I'll show really quickly, Carol, I'm sure it's pretty clear probably, but if I'm doing it here, all I'm doing is kind of creating that and then using my fingers to kind of bend around. And then that way you can see that there's like a curved arched figure. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so now that we have our leaf, and again, I have mine a little bit bent. Carol, that was a great idea. I have it the shape of exactly where I want it to go on my base. All I'm gonna do is use the paintbrush that we included in the kit. I'm gonna open my paint. We all were given different colors, but I happen to have green, so I am gonna use that for my leaf. So I'm just dipping my paintbrush and just covering the surface. Now, because we use this serrated knife, I myself noticed that the thicker the paint is, the more it can kind of gloop in those areas where you have texture. So I think starting with a really thin layer is a good way to make sure that those details show through. And then later, if you wanted more of the color saturation over the clay, what you could do is just, like, let me show you. What you could do is just cover the areas that don't have those serrated marks with the green so that it can show out around the texture. So this is what I have going on. You'll still see that you'll notice that I can still see the veins here, but I'm keeping it nice and thin. And then we also have the water, not only to wet the clay, but to rinse your brush. So when you're switching between colors, all you can do is give your brush a quick rinse, kind of rub it against the bottom of your water cup. That way it gets the bristles nice and clean. And then you can use your paper towel to blot before you dip into your next color. All right. And Carol, I was thinking if it's okay, because I love, one of my favorite parts of yours is the decorative bird you did on the bottom.
Thank you.
And I know that that might be a little overwhelming if you're not quite sure how to start that. So I was thinking before we wrap up with last decoration, let's definitely kind of do an instructional on that, because I think it's easy as long as you kind of are thinking about it in the right way. Does that work for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, let me know.
All right. All right, so I'm gonna form mine. I am looking at Carol's example and I've practiced it a little bit, but Carol, feel free. I know because you created this first one and I just think it's so proportionally wonderful. If you have any tips or tricks that you want to add or something that you did a little bit differently than I'm explaining, please jump in, because your expertise is appreciated.
I will say I did start with the ball. And then I just kind of was pressing and molding it, and I had a bird in mind, but I wasn't really sure what it was going to look like. And I just kept pinching and molding it until I was happy with the look of it. And then I made the little wings.
And I wanted to show you exactly what she means. So you'll notice the head of the bird is here. It has the little, the plumage or the shape of the tail is here. And then there is a separate wing, which she's painted a different color, which I think is great because it really pops. It really stands out. That's a separate piece that's affixed on the outside there. So let's work on the body and then we can do the shape of the wing afterwards. So just like Carol was mentioning, I'm going to start with a ball. It's always the good base shape to start with, as we're seeing. And then just like Carol mentioned, the way that what I always like to do when I'm crafting or drawing is to think about, like Carol, you were mentioning, to think about the basic shape that something is. So when I look at this bird, what I see is a V shape. You could almost say that it's like a J. So when I'm shaping and molding that, what I'm doing is aiming for that general shape first, and then you can kind of work in the details, just like you were saying. So I'm going to take mine from ball and using my finger and thumb, kind of create that V shape first, and then work from there. Oh, and Carol, what I meant to mention earlier, which we had talked about, so we explained that if people wanted to glue on their embellishments, they can do that. The other thing we forgot to mention is some of the trees of life that we've seen have affixed things almost like apart from the base. So for example, you could use a toothpick, stick a piece of the toothpick into the base, and then stick the embellishment into the other end of the toothpick so that it's not affixed to the frame, but it's a little bit more three-dimensionally spanning out. And I think there was definitely an example of that in the slides that you showed. So if people have toothpicks at home, if they want to, you know, rather than gluing things onto the frame directly, they could always try that because it gives it a nice, large, three-dimensional.
Yeah, I think that the samples we saw had some very special little pieces of wire that they were using.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it looked like.
Okay, that makes sense.
So if you're a jewelry maker and you have those supplies, you're good to go.
Perfect. And I'll show you, Carol, mine is, I probably need to put, I'm actually going to, just a little bit of water because my clay is wet enough to work with, but what I notice is it looks like there's a lot of wrinkles or cracks opening up just because when you kind of overwork it. So if you simply put a little dab of water, you're able to smooth just the surface, which makes it a little bit easier to know what the final product will look like. So I'm using that trick that you gave us earlier.
I've had to do the same thing.
Yeah. All right. All right, so I'll show you where I am. So this is the bird that I'm working with. I kind of like the idea. Carol's is beautiful because she did a little less tail plumage and a little bit more neck. And I kind of did the opposite. So I did a shorter neck with a little more tail plumage. So you could do it either way. This could be the front or this could be the front, whatever your heart is telling you to do. But that's
And I
kind
do
of
an even longer neck this time.
oh, I love it. I love it.
I don't know what kind of bird this is, but
It's beautiful. I love it.
I
Okay,
like
perfect.
yours
So now,
too.
now that we have the basic body shapes, I'm just going to take a really small pinch of the clay that I have left. Because for the wing, you'll notice that it's pretty close to, it almost looks like a ball that Carol just pinched between her thumb and forefinger. I think that's a good place to start.
And I think that's what I did.
Okay, it's beautiful, I can tell.
Thank you.
So I've just got a ball here, and what I'm gonna do is just create some pressure between my thumb and forefinger, which kind of flattens it out. And then rather than being a perfect circle, I like that Carol's is a bit of an oval. It's got a nice wing shape there. So I'm just going to make mine a little bit longer and more stretched out.
And I pinched my bird enough that maybe it looks like a goose.
It's very cute. I was going to say I can even see the beak in profile.
Yes.
That's perfect. I love it. All right. And now again, the two ways to affix the wing to the bird would be to, while they're both wet, place it, and you could either use a little water, you can push it down, you can smear the edges into each other. But if you find that you're kind of smashing the shape that you just created by doing that, then you could always let them dry separately, paint them separately, and then glue it on.
And then I did something else a little different as I made it stick up.
Oh, I love it. That's so cute, Carol. I'm going to steal your artistry there, if you don't mind.
Not at
Because
all.
I do any element of it that looks that makes it look a little more three-dimensional, I think is really beautiful. That's fabulous. Very, very cute. Okay. So mine didn't turn out quite as shapely as yours, but I do love the idea of it having its own little three-dimensional character.
Looks great.
Perfect. Okay. Fabulous. So I think because we've shown how to paint the leaf for this one, I'm just going to set it aside and let it dry. Again, if you have a particular place on your tree of life that you'd like to put your bird, you can shape it against that. Just like Carol did on hers here, because it's a heavier piece, I'm going to do mine closer to the base. So having it be more of a flat surface works in that case. But if it was a little bit more delicate, you know, making sure that the surface that you're going to attach has the same contour as where you're going to put it on the base is a great idea. All right. Oh, and then one more thing I wanted to show you all is, so we have this spoon and this fork as our plastic utensil. So just like we created a serrated edge with the knife to create some texture, you can use this spoon and you can use this fork to add little details. So say that I wanted to, you know, make the plumage of my bird a little bit more textured. I'm just going to experiment a little bit. I'm going to use the prongs of the fork in the wing and just kind of create some nice texture there. And then I can do the same thing in the plumage of the tail. Say I wanted to make it look like a tail feather. I'm just going to kind of in a line create these fork indents.
Oh, I love that.
So it looks a little bit more like there's an intentional design to it.
I love that. Well, I found another use for my spoon.
Yes.
And I cleaned my hands off enough that I can pick up this laptop to kind of show.
Ooh.
I have used it to prop up the tree. So it's underneath where the base is. And while it dries, so I'm not going to have to glue it, I was able to attach them.
That is so smart, Carol.
So hopefully my tree of life will stand up straight and not be all crooked.
Great thinking. I love it. I love it.
Thank you.
And then also in it, talking about the structure of I know we mentioned at the beginning that, you know, for these that we're creating, traditionally they are used as candelabras. So having a space in the top to place a candle is a really good way to go. Not that you have to, but it's one option. And you can also use the prongs of your fork to kind of press down and indent and clear out that space so that you would have a little area for your, I'm gonna do this with a separate piece since mine's not quite dry, a little area for your candle to sit. I'm gonna show you just on a separate ball here. You could use the bottom flat edge of your fork, kind of just push it in there. So you'll see the hole that's opening up, and then you can just keep using that to create. And then at that point you could, you know, use your finger, since that's the shape of a candle, more circular, to create that base to put on the top.
I love it. And I have a little hack for that, because I am nervous to do that to the top of mine because it is larger and fragile. So what I'm going to do is, once it's all dry and I'm going to actually put a candle on it, I'm going to just light the candle, drip a little wax, and then boom, pop it on there.
That is so smart. I love that. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
All right, and then Carol, the last little design we have is the flower here. And this is a really quick and easy one, so I figured as our last decoration that we kind of walk people through for, you know, starting the basics, and then they can kind of go off on their own and create their own embellishments. We can use the spoon to create some of the divots in the flower. So we're gonna start with a ball again, so using 2 flat surfaces. And then using my table, I'm just gonna kind of flatten it by creating pressure with my palm. So I've kind of got my flat circle here. And then what I'm gonna do is, using the curved part of the spoon, I'm going to kind of come from behind and show you. So I'm going to just create these little spaces between the petals. So I'm going to push through, and then I'm going to change the spoon direction. So it's almost like I'm cutting out a little V between each one. Okay.
And I love that you said that, because I actually use my knife to cut a V out of mine.
Or you could, occupied. You could do that as well, right? There's a variety of ways. We're all about giving options here, and then whatever you feel most comfortable with is definitely going to be the way to go. All right. Okay, so let me kind of shape this into a more even looking flower before I do the reveal. And then after I cut those spaces out between the petals, what I'm doing is just using my index finger and thumb, pardon me, to smooth the edges so they look rounded, so the petal size looks fairly even. And I'm going to use a little bit more water on my clay, since again, it looks like it's kind of creating these cracks and wrinkles. And I just realized another great use for the knife, Carol, is to kind of pry your clay up off of your flat surface without completely ruining the shape if you really pushed it down good.
Yes, I did that too.
All right.
So I did half of my flower, so you can see it looked
Beautiful.
like this when I cut it out. And then these are the ones that I've smoothed and edged and rounded.
Beautiful. I love that before and after. Thank you for that. Mine is turning out to look a bit more like a star. So I'm gonna work on kind of flattening my petals out as well, but I can show you, I did the same thing as you, Carol, and then although it's not fully worked yet, let's see.
Well, that's what's nice about the clay is you can just keep molding it until you get what you like.
That is so true. So true. And again, mine may look a bit more like a star than a flower, but that's what I'm working with.
Beautiful. I think that in the painting and the way you design it, it'll look fine. I love it.
And who's to say that if you wanted to put a star on yours, you couldn't? Stars are part of nature, and that's with keeping with the Mexican folk art feel of these. And then for Carol's, she painted the center a little bit different. It almost looks like, you know, the center is a different color and it's all one shape. So you could either do that, just differentiate it by painting, or you could create a little ball and put that in the middle so that the center pollen kind of sticks up, whatever your heart desires. Okay. And then I even created some separation between my petals with the serrated edge of the knife. So if you really want to make those look separate or keep them all as one, there are a lot of different ways that you can use your utensils to kind of work to get the effect that you want, just like you were saying.
I love how that came out. It reminds me of a poinsettia.
Oh, well, that's very kind. I see the resemblance. And how's yours coming along, Carol?
Kind of my one flower that I know how to make.
It's beautiful. I love it. I love it.
Thank
it's beautiful
you.
and recognizable as a flower, and people aren't guessing what it is. So that's a good thing.
Thank you.
All right. So those were the basics that we wanted to show everyone: the base, the forming of the leaves, a bird, and a kind of a flower that you can start with. Again, we're gonna let ours dry before we paint and put everything together, but I just wanted to show you all Carol's example. Once it is painted and everything is adhered, that's what we're looking for. And I think, Carol, it would be a really good idea once ours dry and we paint them to post pictures so that people know what the final product was. So stay tuned because we want to make sure we see Carol's double-armed tree of life for sure.
I promise, whatever it comes out looking like, I will share it. And I encourage you to share yours too, even if, say, someone else drops it on the ground.
That definitely didn't happen here. That's not a personal story. No, no, no. And I was going to say, Carol, I know that a lot of us, have been missing getting together with, our community during the times of COVID. So, we were hoping that with this craft and having the interactive element of it, even if you, even if you have certain ideas about how yours turned out, just knowing that we were all crafting together and got, we're working towards the same result, it helps me feel a little bit more connected to our patrons and our community members. So that's a wonderful part of it too. So I really encourage you all to share for that reason, and that it provides this space of shared experience in times when that's a little bit more rare. So.
Agreed. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you. And so lastly, before we let everyone go, we just wanted to highlight that again, Hispanic Heritage Month runs from now until October 15th. We hope that everyone will keep an eye on our website calendar, our website programs page, as well as our social media accounts for additional Hispanic Heritage Month related programming, Hispanic Heritage Spotlight social media posts. And I do want to remind everyone that we had a fabulous live Noche de Cuentos storytelling program just this past Thursday, and that recording is up on our website as of now. So please be sure to check that out. It was absolutely fabulous. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is we will be doing the craft bags again for our October craft. We're going to be doing an autumn leaf mason jar candle holder. So those, which Carol is going to graciously show us an example of, and we will have craft bags available a little bit closer to October. So keep your eye out, be sure to pick those up. We're really excited to be doing that one for October. And that'll be a Thursday adult craft as well. Carol, is there anything else that I forgot that you'd like to share?
No, I think that's perfect. I love it. I'm so excited for this next upcoming craft in October. So great.
Me too. Perfect. Well, thank you everyone so much. We hope that you enjoy getting your hands dirty as much as we did today. And again, this was in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month. So stay tuned for other programming that we'll be offering to really commemorate that. And we'll see you all next time.